Morning, we talked a little bit about the different churches that are out there, and is it okay to go to the church of your choice and go anywhere and to do the things that you feel that you might like to do. And we talked about other aspects of the church and answering questions when people ask about, what's the difference? Why can't we go here? What does the Bible say about that? So tonight we're going to do some more along the same lines about churches that are churches of Christ in this particular realm tonight, and some of the experiences that I've run into in my family when we go to churches of Christ, say when we're vacationing, and in the example of when my oldest daughter moved to Tennessee, she found a church. It was fairly easy. There was a lot to choose from. You'd go, you go listen to their worship service, you visit there a couple of times, you get to know some of the people, and it's all right down the line like we talked about this morning with the acts of worship and the rest of that. So she was able to choose, and they were able to choose, her and her husband, where they wanted to go, and they found a place. And that was easy. Now they moved from Tennessee up to Pennsylvania. Now they're starting to head east and north, and it wasn't that easy all of a sudden. They got to their home, they researched online, and they found, they looked at the website, and they're like, because he's, a techie, he likes to look at all that stuff. And he found a website, they read, what they believe, what they do, how their services run, and all that sort of thing. And they drive, it's right down the street, 15, 20 minutes away, and come to find out it's nothing like what they had on their website. So they were like, wait a minute, this isn't a sound church, a biblically sound church that we're used to. Then they tried, okay, we're going to have to fan out. The one right in the neighborhood was even worse than the one they saw online, and that was a block away. So then they ventured out 40 minutes, nothing. Then they ventured out an hour and 10 minutes, and still all these churches that were churches of Christ were not places that they could get involved in. So finally, they went 40 minutes away. They drove up to the smaller church because they're used to 300 member, 200 and some member sound churches. And they went to one, there was like 20 cars in the parking lot, and my daughter started crying, and they drove away. They're like, oh no, this is going to be a nightmare. So when we went to visit them, we said, this may be what you're looking for. It may be your answer in this area to have a church that's a sound church. You have to go in. Because when I saw it, I'm thinking, I know why I would have run away too. Because you think that it's not going to work out. But when you go in, we found out that it was a smaller church, 30, 40 people, plenty of children, young people, and the like, and it was sound. So the reason I say all this is because tonight we're going to address some of the problems within the Lord's church, or what people call the Lord's church. So in this town, I don't know if there's other congregations, because obviously we found out about you, this congregation, from the congregation we presently go to. And they said you were sound. So it's like, that's a good place to start. Come in, we find out that you are. So we didn't have to go anywhere else. But anybody any other churches in this city, if you come across people and they're going to say, well, what's the difference between your Church of Christ and that Church of Christ? If it's not obvious that we're not Lutheran or Baptist or Catholics, don't have the steeples and the rest of it. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. And some of the things that I've found in this realm is, of course, they're liberal and they have fellowship halls and entertainment. And that's what my son-in-law and my daughter found in their experience, was they had the entertainment and the fellowship halls, but they were hidden from sight on websites and investigational things that you do today. So that's what we're going to take a look at. First, we'll read this, John 17:21 and 22. That they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you. So he's saying the Father and Christ are both one. That they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me, and the glory which you gave me, I have given them, that they may be one, just as we are one. So all that says in a nutshell, the Father and the Son are one. Is that thing blinking out on me? Oh, there you go. Get a quick look, write down the stuff fast. Could disappear any second. So all of these are one, he's saying, and he gave this, Christ gave us, the church, to be one with the Father and the Son. As long as that's happening, as long as the three gel together, then it's a good church. It's a sound church. So I want to define some words that we need to understand for tonight's study and just to think about when we're talking. And it's not political stuff, because all that stuff flies around, liberalism, conservatism, and blah, blah, blah. All that, but it's not that. We're talking about liberal in the fact of what the meaning of liberal is and the fact of what conservative is. So as far as liberal, it's not restricted in literal meaning. That means if you're liberal, then you don't have a restriction on the meaning, the literal meaning of something. And that is something, especially in the interpretation of the law. You just like, what's the big deal, kind of a deal. So it's very simple on that case. Then the other word that we hear a lot in the political realm is conservative. And all that means in the definitions is tending to preserve established institutions. So you kind of preserve what's already there. You preserve what you've learned and you carry that on. Then the next one is what we hear. I used to hear a lot about it, and I don't hear a lot about it anymore in preaching and so forth. Maybe it's the church I've been going to. But institutional. So that's intended primarily to gain prestige. So if you have an institution, then it needs to be, they don't worry too much about what's going on in it. They just worry about the prestige that it perceives. And that would be institutional as the idea. The next thing is anti. And that's obvious. That's a person who opposes something. A proposal is against something. They're anti-Trump. You hear a lot of that going on. Is something that pops in my head right away. Other than that, I didn't hear a lot of the term anti-something or other. Used to hear about it in the church a little bit more than we have in the past. The next one is fellowship, and that's social, which is good. Mutual sharing of an activity, such as meals and sports. And then also, it has the meaning of spiritual, and that is what it says in 1 John 1:7, which is walking in the light. We're participating and we're fellowshipping, doing something together in that realm, the religious or the spiritual realm. Then the last thing we'll look at is entertainment. And that's just interesting, diverting, something amusing, and so forth. Now, if you look at all these together, in order to have a church that's sound, in order to have one that is unified, then basically all these things have to be a part of it. We can't be so conservative that we don't look at what we need to do in order to get people. We can't have a literal restriction on certain things in the Bible because it's not meant to be taken literal. So then we have that little bit of liberal part where we say, well, wait a minute, let's explore this and see if this is something we're supposed to do or if it's okay. We can't be so conservative. We can't not be institutional, meaning there is a certain amount of prestige being a church of Christ. That carries a prestige. You're carrying the name of Christ. So that automatically says, well, they've got the name of Christ on their building, and that's something to look at. So when I go to a town, I want to know who it belongs to Christ. I'm going to look at the names. So there is a form of all these little things. We have to be against sin. We can't be non-anti, anti-anti. So we have to be against sin. We have to have social things outside of this building. Don't have to have it inside the building. So that's where the conservative part comes in. So all these things, and I have to say something that's fun because otherwise you all will be asleep. So there is an aspect of, here's a story and, okay, I can remember that and relate. So all these things are taken into account, that it's something that we need to have in a balance. And the Bible, of course, teaches us how to do that. So now let's take a look at Liberalism is not adhering to sound principles. So that's all we have to understand for in the general negative sense of liberalism. You don't adhere to sound principles. You're not bound by established forms. And that's what we need as a church to recognize in other groups, and when we're explaining what the difference is between this Church of Christ and the Church of Christ down the street. There are certain things and bounds and principles that are not adhered to. And that's in a nutshell. See, right now, one who is liberal is basically dangerous to the Lord's church, because they don't, if they're strictly liberal, they don't see things as being a problem when we veer off and do other things. It says, trying to justify anything without an appeal to the Bible. So when we set a standard and say, this is what we think we're going to do, and we're going to take this particular work on, or this particular thing, then we have to compare it to the Bible. So if we're going to have a potluck, we're going to say, all right, according to the Bible, is that something we can do as a group? Why, yes, we can. If we're going to, where are we going to do this? Are we going to take church funds and say, let's do this? And then you have to see, well, there's no example for that. There's no authority, so we can't do that. And then we just have to gauge the things that we're trying to do in order to build the congregation or to save souls in the community. As long as we compare these things with what the Bible tells us is okay, then we can actually name it a good work and say this is something we can do and it's a good work biblically. Because a lot of times people use the term good work and say anything can be done as long as it's a good work. And then you can have fish fries here at the building. It's a good work. It brings people in. And then the other thing is the end justifies the means. And I hear that a lot. Well, so what, it's not really, we can't find any authority for it in the biblical realm. But it justifies the means. It gets people in here, and then we can start working on them. But is that really what we need to be doing? And that would be no. So in order to grow our numbers, we have to let God and the power of God's Word do that for us. I know for some it sounds boring because, well, we need more. And that's what a lot of groups do, even the ones that carry the name Church of Christ. They want to add to it and say, well, that's not enough. But we know that it is. It gets people here. If it gets people here, it's a good work. If it helps the young people stay off the street, that's what they may use to justify doing something that's not in the biblical realm, not compared to the Bible. The community will look up to the church. They'll say, well, they're doing great things over there. Let's go see what they're doing. And then denominations will do it if we don't. I've actually heard that before by a group. Well, the denominations are doing it, and they're getting a lot of members. So if we actually do certain things, then they're going to do it anyway, so we might as well do it so we can capture those people. But it all just sounds like, like a bad self-help seminar. It's like, what are we talking about here? We have the good news, even though we're not 300 people, 200 people, or whatever. We have the good news, the gospel. So we have to understand in our own minds that it's not up to us to try to make it more palatable or more interesting, because the power of God is pretty interesting. And if we just remember the fact that we cast the seeds, there's that whole thing about throwing the seeds out and they land on the different places, the road, the side of the road, the good soil. That's all our responsibility is. So all we have to get excited about is growing this church and getting the elders and doing things back to the Bible, so to speak. Not that we haven't been, because this is a sound church, but going the next step and having the things that we need to prove to ourselves and to others that we're following the Bible just as it says. So we just have to put it out there and let the chips fall where they may, and then move on. There's plenty of passages and things we can talk about in that realm. The next thing is conservative values, so to speak. The Bible-believing people who understand the Scriptures have a different attitude toward divine authority. So if you're going by the Scriptures, then you understand that there's divine authority, and then you notice what God says about things. So that's the difference of taking a, what you call, conservative view. You're starting out with, all right, there's a certain pattern, and we're going to check to see if our life and our worship fits into that pattern. And where it doesn't, then we have to be liberal enough to change the way we do things, and not like the order. So if we had the order of service changed, this would be first, and then the song would be second. It's not a problem. I know everybody goes, oh, we haven't done it that way. That's where you want to be. Okay, let's just, it's okay. That's all right to let those things go and to do things a little differently along those realms, because they're all part of the service and they're authorized. The order doesn't make a difference. So as long as we can have those types of conversations, I think we'll be fine. Now there's a passage here in 2 John 9. Whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. So that's an important statement. If we don't abide in the doctrine that Christ has given us, we don't have God. We don't have the Father. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. Basically, we're covered by everything. So that's an important thing to remember. We just have to abide in the doctrine, and then again there's that, what's the doctrine? That's so easy. We just got to figure out what it is. In 1 Corinthians 4:6, now these things, brethren, I have figuratively transferred to myself and Apollos for your sakes, that you may learn not to think beyond what is written. So he's telling us there, don't think too far ahead, and don't go past what is written. Because if everything that pertains to life and godliness is found in the Scriptures, we don't have to go with what's beyond what is written. And it says that none of you may be puffed up on behalf of one against another. So we just have to control ourselves and not go beyond what's written. In 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, it's a favorite passage of a lot of people and myself. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. So we know it's given by God, all of it. It says right there. That's the Old and the New Testament. It's there for our learning. We learn in other passages. And is profitable for doctrine. So we can find the doctrine that we need in the Bible. And it's for reproof. That's for changing things. Telling you're not doing it right because it doesn't match up. It's for correction, for instruction in righteousness, which is another term for rightness. It's instruction in rightness. So in order to be right and righteous, we have to follow the instructions. That the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. So that's the way the good work should be used. It is a good work to follow and obey, not a good work to do what you think is good. So there's a difference there, and we have to know that. Book, chapter, and verse is required for all that we do. And that's an old saying, but I think it's the only one we can follow. The gospel is powerful. All that is needed to reach men is right there. Everything that we need can be found in the Scriptures, and that's all that we have to go through and follow. Now, we also talk about invitations to come hear the gospel are being replaced today with invitations to come, and this is a real thing. It really did a Church of Christ, not a denomination. I know it sounds like, some other group, but this was a Church of Christ. To some, come help us eat the largest hot dog in the world. And then there's another place that had volleyball and tennis and all these activities scheduled, and they actually removed the pews and put in folding chairs so they could move everything and play sports, indoor sports, in actual Churches of Christ. It sounds impossible, but these are all places that I've found and heard of, and built extravagant kitchens and buffet type places. It looks like Golden Corral at this church. I'm like, wow. Because being a contractor, they hired a contractor to build this church addition, and in the addition they had basically a golden corral where they had separators and veggie stands and grills and the whole deal. So anyways, that's something we know, obviously, that if you're following the Bible at all, that that's not what we should be doing. But we don't want to go down those types of lanes. When we leave the Bible, we understand that all things are possible. If there's no authority, then anything goes, and then people can fall into this type of desperation. Churches of Christ have gone to extremes to accommodate social needs of their members. And that's the difficult part, is the social needs. Because you see people looking for a church, and it's discouraging sometimes when you're a church and you invite somebody, say, well, what do your church has to offer my children? Or what are the kind of after-school activities do you have? Or I had somebody say, what kind of, can you help me out with some food or a place to stay? I go, our church doesn't do that. He's like, what? I go, we don't do that. It's not authorized to help everybody in that way. We're authorized to help the saints, needy saints, with the church treasury. I can help you myself, and there's other people here that can help you, but it's not for the group to take in everybody and house them and feed them because of whatever bad choices they've made. And that was shocking to him, and he was like, well, what can I do? I said, you'll have to go somewhere else, with a mission or something. So people do ask those questions, and they automatically think, well, the church is the place to go to get what I want, because I've made a bad choice, and now I want something, and that's where I go, and then I can use the church in that way. And that's probably why when God says that we're here to take care of needy saints and not the world, but we have an individual mandate to take care of the poor and the needy, that's probably what it is, so we don't get taken as a church, in other words. Just my idea on that subject. Churches of Christ seem to be trying desperately to keep up with the denominations. So in some of these examples, they've been trying to keep up with the denominations and do what they do in some smaller form, perhaps, or some larger form. But that's something we can steer away from just by sticking to what we know and what the Bible says, and comparing, of course, with Bible authority. So where's Bible authority to build and maintain places like that? Well, you can't find it. There's no examples of church funds being used to make and to deliver the masses food and lodging and entertainment. It's always for the needy saints. It's if there's a problem in a church, and we should probably do a study sometime on that, but it's very interesting. All the passages that talk about helping is always the saints in Jerusalem, the saints here, the saints there, saints in the church, the widows indeed. They're not just going to help every widow, they're going to help widows indeed, and so forth and so on. So we have that mandate not to get involved in sponsoring entertainment. No, but that's a hard thing because it seems like it works for the other groups. So once the demand for the Bible authority is set aside or compromised, the only limit is placed upon the church, that the church would be the desire of the people and the imagination of the leaders. And that's what, as a Church of Christ, we cannot fall into, is that desire of the people to help and the imagination of the leaders to say it's okay. So I think you're on the right track or God is obviously on the right track, when He established elders that have been around a while, and they can discern the Scriptures. They've got practice. They're not novices, and they can say, "Well, no, we don't want to get involved in that because we can't find anything about it." Even though the people may say, "Can't we do this? Can't we do that?" And there's someone there to rein us in. So, where is the Bible authority to build or maintain a fellowship hall? And the thing to remember is there has to be 3 different ways of doing it, of getting Bible authority. It's a direct command where you're told this is what you do and don't do. And then there's an example. Well, we have an example of what they did. That's not a direct command, but they do certain things. We look at them, we read about it, and we say that's what we can do because they did it. And then the other one is the difficult one, is something that's inferred by what somebody did. So they call that, in the fancy term, necessary inference. I don't know if you all have heard that, or in a while. But it's just, they did certain things. We can see that they talked about things that they did, the apostles in the first century church, and we can say because they did these things, we know that they're okay for us to do. So that's kind of the three ways. And we know if it's not one of those three, then we don't want to get involved in it. So where is the biggest argument is that it's still a good work, and that the justify ends the means, or the justify is the, whatever I'm trying to say. And it's also being expedient. They throw that word out there, I found, in some of these groups, and that just means helpful. So it's a helpful thing, so we should be able to do it. But we know that not all things that are helpful are lawful. But for something to be helpful, it must be shown to be lawful. And that's where we have to draw the line. And I'm sure you read this in Galatians 6:10. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us all do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And that's what I was talking about. Let us do good to all, but not for all. That's the important thing to remember. We're not here to do for all and give everybody everything that they desire in their life. But we have to do good to all, and remember that. So how is that done? And how do we do these things, and how do we get this authority to seek and save the lost? Well, the only way we can do it is through the gospel of Christ. And that means we have to know the gospel. We have to know the good news and how to present the good news. The Bible authorizes the church to meet for worship. It authorizes us to preach the gospel to the lost. That's another thing we can do. It is for edifying the saints, that's us, and to relieve the needy saints. And those are the things that it's authorized to do out in the world. So any houses or facilities that are necessary to the church doing that kind of work in those four realms, the edifying, worshiping, preaching the gospel to the lost, and taking care of needy saints, comes under the authority for what we should do. So we have to remember, when talking to people around the community, there are differences even in churches of Christ. So if they come and say, well, what's the difference? Then you'll know there are differences. What have you found at the other place? Have you been to the other place? And if not, come to our place and maybe you'll see the difference and we can explain it to you. So we have to be able to explain that through the power of God's Word. It worked. We have to, like I said earlier, cast the seed. Go out there and preach and teach and not worry about, our own personal ideas of how this person should have listened to us. It's a discouragement when you talk to somebody, spend a great deal of time with them, and then they walk away. And you're like, oh, what could I have done? We don't have to have done anything. If we present the gospel to this community and they don't accept it, that's perfectly fine. Our job is done. We've done what we've been commanded to do. And as long as we do that, and go to the next one, and the next one, we'll have no problems with ourselves and what we've done for the gospel. Jesus' blood was shed to purchase the church. So now that it has purchased the church, a spiritual house with a spiritual mission. So that's what we need to try to remember. This is a spiritual house and a spiritual mission. So in order to get people, we have to appeal to them in a spiritual way. And that is saving of souls. Where the basic question is, where are we going when we die? What is this all for? I mean, that's the big one, right? That everybody's always talking about. What is this life for? What is the meaning of life? Well, we have the answer to that. And that should be pretty comforting to a lot of people. I'm sure in this community there's a lot of people that don't have that type of answer. And Jeff, being a cop, has been telling me some of the stories about how he's been talking to people in the community that obviously he would have never seen before. You know, just doing what he does normally in the community, you're not going to run into people and get a chance to say anything to them. So that's the kind of thing that we can do in the community, is just put a seed out there, put a word out there, something to spark it. Maybe it's used 6 months down the road, maybe it's never used. But at least we're doing it. In 1 Peter 2:5, you also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So we need to offer those spiritual sacrifices that are acceptable to God, and that's going to be through Christ. And he gives us that authority to do that, which is a wonderful thing. In 1 Timothy 3:15, but if I am delayed, I write so that you may know that you ought to how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the ground of the truth. So having that responsibility of being the pillar and the ground and the example of the living God in this area, then we just always need to guard ourselves as we move forward with getting elders and doing the things that we want to and need to do, that we have to remember that we are the pillar and the church of the living God. And we have that responsibility to continue that effort. So wholesome social activities are important in the life of each Christian. We have to be able to have social time, and that's important. God made a distinction between the responsibility of the home, which is our social time, and the responsibility of the church, which is getting together, having this time, helping to save each other's souls, edify each other, sing. You know, we see people and we go, I'm so glad they're here. That inspires me, and so forth. And that's what we're to do for each other. And if you are a child of God and you've strayed away from the faith, you've done things that you're ashamed of, that you've brought reproach to the church, then we can help you by coming forward and telling somebody what you've done, and we'll give you the prayers of the saints, which is one of the most powerful things you can get in a time like that. If you are not a Christian and you want to become a Christian and learn more about it, there's plenty of people here that can help you. So if you have any needs at all, come forward while we stand and sing.